Without individuals, you may have computers to execute many different tasks that you need to do. Basically, you still need people behind them. My name is Antoine Devinat. I'm an industrial psychologist, and the name of my firm is ADN Leadership. And I basically work with large, medium, small companies in different HR issues that they may have. Wow, that's a pretty large question, and in fact, it's the main reason why I chose that field of expertise, which is industrial organizational psychology in the first place, for a very simple reason. Without individuals, you may have computers to execute many different tasks that you need to do. Basically, you still need people behind them. And there's a certain level of, I wouldn't even say a certain level, there's an extreme level of complexity in hiring people, managing people, developing people, and ergo, for me, for any type of organization, even more so today than maybe 10 or 15 years ago, it is a very important, it's the main issue for most organizations right now. Well, first, I'm sure everybody is aware that there's a problem with about the availability of resources. When you have an unemployment rate of less than 5%, that creates a major challenge in terms of the availability of resources from one organization to another. And I was explaining this to my daughter a few weeks ago, like why unemployment was a good thing. You want unemployment rates to be at 8 or 9% at least, because it creates a certain movement between organizations, between positions, between opportunities that you don't have today. So what organizations are faced with is becoming more and more creative, both in their recruitment purposes to attract the right people. They need to become more and more creative in terms of kind of the characteristics, what they offer, what they offer within the job or within the organization. And they have to be very creative and ingenious in terms of how they can develop and maintain and keep the people that they've hired. Because turnaround right now is again has gone up. COVID didn't help. There was even a trend at some point, I think it was the second year of COVID in 2021, it was called Covexit. It was like the Brexit, but now it was cool to leave your job and to seek something else. Where if you think about it, in the 80s or 90s, people were happy to have a job. And today it's like, whatever I want to do, I can. And it's true. I have a friend of mine, she's 26 or 7. She switched job, I think, 5 times in the last 6 years. 20 years ago, that would be unimaginable. And one would consider that individual a bad resource. You wouldn't even hire her in the first place because of that level of movement. But today, it's very different. But it becomes a major challenge for organizations. There are lots of ways. I think the idea of adapting through salary has its limits. For a specific at some point, it's unsustainable. You can't just pay more and more your employees, because at some point you have your input of money, and that price level or that price margin or whatever services that you're offering, at some point your clients, your customers won't be able to pay what you need them to pay to be able to pay your employees. So the salary angle doesn't work very well. And in fact, studies have shown that there's a certain cap of salary where it doesn't have any more impact in terms of motivation or satisfaction at work. I believe it's been a while since I've checked that data, but the last time I checked, I think it was 7 or 8 years ago, was this U.S. study, and I believe the number was around. It may sound surprising, but I think the number was around $55,000 or $60,000 a year. After that, it didn't have a major impact on employee retention, satisfaction, or performance. So the salary angle for me isn't a good one. The first part, I think organizations are doing better and better, and it's interesting because I keep hearing these ads on the radio more and more, is finding new ways to attract people. They'll stop talking about the salary that they're offering. They talk a lot about the type of work environment that they're creating, the work climate, interactions between employees, how fun it is to work in this organization compared to another one. So they're really working hard on trying to sell, hopefully, the reality. Problem is, sometimes they're selling an organization, and it's not what we often call in our lingo a realistic job preview. It's a bit fake, and once the employees get to meet potential employers or managers or their team, and after a few weeks, they realize, okay, what they were advertising isn't, in fact, what's actually going on in the organization per se. But a lot of organizations are working hard on trying to create a more attractive brand for the organization so that employees are interested in coming to work for that company. 10 or 15 years ago, a good example of that was Cirque du Soleil. In Quebec, if you wanted to work somewhere, people were very proud of working in Cirque du Soleil. They had the suit, they had the pants, the t-shirts, whatever. They could find the bandanas of the Cirque du Soleil, and it was like, oh, you're so lucky to work there. Today, not as much. It was sold, doesn't have that same level of attraction. But an organization that didn't have any attractive incentive or good feel to it was Hydro-Quebec. You would talk to someone who worked there 15, 20 years ago, like, work at Hydro-Quebec, how lame is that? But I need to be careful because it's a very good client of mine. I love working with them, but at the same time, their reputation wasn't that great. But today, with everything they're doing in terms of with Hilo, with the different the technology side, they're super strong on IT. So they're doing things very differently within that organization, so they become more attractive. So organizations need to look at how attractive they are and what they are selling, but making sure that what they're selling is actually what's happening. The second part I believe that they can work on is how they actually, when they're acquiring new resources, new people, what goes on during the first days, the first few weeks, the first few months? What kind of experience does the employee have when he's integrating this new organization, this new position? There's a lot of stuff that they're doing a bit better, I believe, today in terms of making sure that the team works hard to integrate this new person within the team. The manager needs to be more available and tries to be, so that the individual has a better understanding of what's expected of him, and understands also everything that you don't know that's not written anywhere. It's called informal cues or informal rules. In some organization, you can interact with different types of people independently of hierarchy. Other organizations, that's not exactly the case. But if you don't know that, you can make mistakes, and it creates a less positive experience in terms of your first few weeks and months. So I do believe that there's some stuff that's going on in terms of trying to integrate new resources a bit more efficiently and more interestingly for them. But that's not all. People want to grow. Employees want to grow. Millennials, they think that from day one they can become the next CEO 3 months later. That's not realistic. But what's positive in that is that they have this optimism about what opportunities could look like. So if the dialogue that's going on is what they're hearing from HR, what they're hearing from their managers, like, forget about it, that's never going to happen, you're unrealistic, take off your pink glasses, I'm not sure that's the type of appropriate conversation you want to have with them. So some organizations are working hard on creating a more interesting conversation on their own, on what development could look like. Now, from that angle, there are things that are being done in some organizations today that are really extreme, but I find extremely interesting. Usually what we had tendency to do is to look at potential paths. So you're in this role or in this job, and the next level is this, and the next job could be this, and the next job should be that. And so you had a kind of a very simplified path that you could potentially envision as what you should think about, what could happen in terms of growth within the organization. That's very limiting, and employees right now aren't reacting positively to that. Because at some point, maybe you want to go elsewhere in the organization. Maybe some of your competencies should be transferable or usable in other areas. And so what they're trying to do more and more, I see some organizations working more on, what do you like to do? Not what type of role do you want to play or type of responsibility. What do you like to do? So we're focusing more on in fact, professional interests or vocational interests more than abilities. And the idea behind that approach is to say, well, instead of working on what you can do, let's try to focus on what you like to do or what you love to do. And because models have shown and studies have shown that the more you love someone, the more you'll work hard to get better at it. And an example I often use, and I try to, I consider myself not a handyman, but someone who's interested in renovations and in fixing things. And I love it. Doesn't mean that I'm super good at it, but I do love doing that. And so what I try to do, and when I have opportunities to learn from people who are extremely good at it, I take the time, I put in the extra effort to try to get better and better at it. And today, I'm 20 years later, I think I'm pretty good. I wouldn't say I can build a house, but I can still repair a lot of things in a house. And the fact that I bought one obviously forced me into that direction, but I loved it. So that's the idea. The idea of focusing more on what you love to do. And there are tools that can be used that some organizations are using right now to measure, in fact, what are your vocational interests. And they also measure what are the associated vocational interests for an enormous series of roles and tasks and responsibilities. And they try to map people with tasks that will interest them more. So instead of having a job where you like maybe 70% or 80% of what you do, and you're like, and the tendency we had is like, oh, well, the other 20%, that's life, but I still love the first 80% part of it. Now let's bring this up to 90, 95%, 98%. And so you'll people will want to stay in that's a strategy that some organization, but it creates a craziness in terms of restructuring how the work process looks like. It is very complicated, but we are observing organizations who are doing that right now, and it's working really well. But it is a major challenge, and even more so for large organizations, let's admit. I'm not sure they'll listen. One of the reasons why I never joined an organization and stayed outside as an external consultant is how, and maybe the word is a bit too strong, but sometimes I am saddened. Sometimes I even feel horrified in terms of the level of expectation, the level of pressure organizations put on their managers and employees. Now, mind you, there are slackers. There's slackers everywhere. There are people who aren't pulling their weight. And full transparency, it's gotten worse since COVID, because a lot of managers, they weren't just managing their operation. They had to manage everybody's feelings, and they were scared of A, B, and C, and this person's sick now, can't work. And it's tough. I see a lot of burnouts. I see people cry like 10 times more than they did before when I'm meeting with them in coaching one-on-one sessions. For me, that's not normal. Something's wrong. And I think part of it is the level of expectation, the amount of time people have to do things. Everything's urgent. And it isn't. I mean, unless you say, okay, I need to deliver the quarterly reports, fine. Okay, the quarterly reports need to be published. It's a legal obligation. Fine. But there's so many things. When I see some of my customers or clients or coaching people that I coach, and they talk about the level of pressure they're under and what's expected of them, for me, it makes no sense. It's inhuman. And in all units, it's not just operations, it's in HR, it's in IT, it's in finance, everywhere. And why?
It's like a market culture.
It's like almost cool for them to say, today was a big day, I worked hard, we got a lot of stuff to do, lots of stuff. How is that a good thing? And people, you have these, sometimes you meet people in an elevator, like, how was your day? Or what's you going to do? It's a crazy day today. And it's as if they're bragging about it. But ultimately, put that in a few days, in a few weeks, in a few months, and in years, it's not positive at all. I mean, human beings, look at in the 50s, you worked from 9 to 5, 9 to 4:30, came back home at 5. You had a family life. Today, I see people... there's a person I coach, gets up at 4:30. Like, the jogging part's fine, but he starts working at 5:36. He finishes at 6 o'clock. He works 60 hours during the week, half a day over the weekend. And that's what's expected of him. One of my clients has a boss who's texting them like at 11 o'clock on Sunday night, and they expect a response. That's nuts. Teams or Zoom or whatever, video conferencing, it's horrible. You finish a meeting, 30 seconds later, you're expected to start a new one. And your days like that, back to back. That's not sane. When we were physically everybody together, you had a meeting, you had a few minutes to go from one place maybe to another, you were talking to people, you had that interaction. Yes, maybe performance went up 10%, but I can guarantee you the consumption of particular pills has probably gone up 30. Is that a good thing? Not sure. It's not, long term, it's not viable. And I think big corporations, small ones, I see that everywhere. They really need to rethink the type of work environment that they're creating for employees.